The grand hall was alive with the low hum of conversation as human and Serac delegates filled the space, exchanging glances that carried the weight of an entire galaxy. The air was thick with formality, the thick scent of incense mixing with the metallic aroma of Serac warriors in their shimmering armor. Captain Dana Reyes stood at the front, wearing her customary calm demeanor. This was no ordinary summit. For the past year, humanity had been navigating tense negotiations with the Serac Empire, a race of towering, war-hardened aliens known for their merciless battles and unparalleled strength. The meeting today was meant to seal a fragile alliance, a treaty that would hopefully prevent a war that could wipe out entire star systems. Reyes knew better than anyone how delicate the balance was. Every word, every gesture could either push them closer to peace or tear everything apart. But in her experience, a human handshake was a universal symbol of trust, an opening, a gesture of goodwill. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind. The formalities were almost over. The final exchange of words before the Serac Queen made her grand appearance. Reyes stepped forward, extending her hand toward Queen Veja, as the Queen descended from her raised throne. The room seemed to hold its breath. The Serac Queen, with her regal bearing, and the cold gaze of someone who had conquered worlds, stood before her, taller than most of the humans in the room by at least 2 feet. Her black and gold armor shimmered with an eerie beauty, and her enormous wings twitched in anticipation. Despite the beauty, an aura of danger clung to the Queen. She was not a creature to be trifled with. Reyes didn't hesitate. She offered her hand, firm but respectful. But in a single terrible instant, it happened. The Queen's wings flicked, and in that split second, the back of her armored arm brushed lightly against Reyes's fingers. It was the smallest of touches, a mistake, a simple misstep. But the silence that followed was deafening. The room froze, and every pair of eyes turned from the Queen to the human, stunned by the act. The Serac were known for their pride, their honor. Touching their Queen without permission was an unthinkable violation. It was an act that could be seen as a challenge, an insult to her status, to her power. And yet, Reyes had only meant to offer a gesture of peace. Queen Veja's eyes narrowed, her reptilian pupils dilating with fury. Her voice, when it came, was as cold and sharp as a blade. "Touch me again, human, and you'll live to regret it." The words echoed through the hall like thunder, vibrating the walls. The Serac nobles, warriors, and dignitaries all tensed, the air growing thick with a dangerous energy. Reyes could feel the stares, the heat of their fury like a palpable force pressing against her chest. The humans in the room were already backing away in terror, but Reyes stood her ground. She had never expected to be in this position, yet she knew instinctively that backing down now would be a far worse crime. The eyes of the galaxy were upon her. Her hands clenched at her sides, not out of fear, but defiance. "Your Majesty," Reyes said, her voice calm but unwavering, "I apologize for the mistake, but I meant no disrespect. Let us not let this act define the rest of our time here." The Queen's gaze never left her, burning through her with an intensity that would have made lesser beings collapse. But Reyes stood firm, meeting the Queen's fury with a steady gaze. The tension in the room was so thick that it could have been cut with a knife. This was not the way the summit was supposed to unfold, but the foundation for something deeper, something more dangerous, had already been laid. The silence in the grand hall was suffocating. For a long moment, no one moved, no one even breathed. The Serac warriors, stoic and powerful, stood motionless, their eyes locked on Captain Reyes. The diplomats shuffled nervously in the back, their faces pale with fear. The human representatives had been bracing themselves for this meeting, but none of them had expected it to implode so violently. Queen Veja's gaze remained cold and unwavering, her eyes like twin pools of black ice, glinting with unspoken rage. The massive wings of the Queen twitched in agitation, her regal armor shimmering as if alive with the power of her fury. She was a creature of war, of dominance, and nothing in her history had ever prepared her to be so openly defied. But Race didn't flinch. Her hand remained steady at her side, her posture unbroken. The words of the queen hung in the air, sharp and bitter, but they didn't sink into Reyes's heart as they should have. No, she wasn't afraid. Not now. Not ever. "Your Majesty," Reyes repeated, her voice low but firm. The hall remained tense, the atmosphere thick with an unspoken promise of what was to come. Queen Vejay stood before Captain Reyes, her expression inscrutable, yet the air between them felt charged, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The Serath, proud and deadly, were watching closely, their sharp eyes never leaving the human diplomat who had dared to defy their queen. Reyes stood tall, her posture resolute. But inside, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The queen had shown an unexpected flicker of curiosity, but it was clear that this would not be enough to avoid the consequences of her mistake. The Serath respected strength above all, and to challenge their queen's authority was a transgression that would not be forgiven lightly. "You have insulted me, human," Queen Vejay said, her voice quiet but laced with an unrelenting edge. "And now you will prove that you are worthy of standing in my presence. You will face a trial, a test of endurance, and if you survive, perhaps we will reconsider the value of your species." The room held its breath as the words echoed in the vast hall. A trial of endurance. The Serath had a long history of brutal challenges, designed to break even the mightiest of warriors. These trials tested not only physical strength but mental fortitude, resilience, and the ability to endure pain beyond what any sane creature would withstand. Reyes knew what was coming. She had studied the Serath customs extensively in preparation for this meeting, but no amount of preparation could fully prepare her for the true horror of their trials. She had no illusions about her chances. The Serath were faster, stronger, and far more suited to such a test. But what they didn't have, what they didn't understand, was the heart of humanity. "I accept your challenge, Your Majesty," Reyes said, her voice steady, unwavering. The queen's eyes flicked over her, calculating, measuring. She seemed almost amused by the human's audacity. Yet beneath that amusement was something else. A respect, perhaps. She knew that few could match her strength, and she was curious to see just how far this human would go before breaking. She gestured to the side, and a massive Serath warrior stepped forward, carrying with him an ancient weapon, a long serrated blade forged from an unknown metal that gleamed in the harsh light. The trial was simple. Endure the weapon's relentless assault for as long as possible. No weapons of your own. No armor. Just you and the blade. Reyes's breath hitched, but her resolve remained unshaken. The queen's eyes burned into hers, daring her to back down. But Reyes held her ground. This was her moment, and she would not let it slip away. As the trial began, the warrior lunged toward her with brutal speed. The first strike came so fast that Reyes barely had time to react. It grazed her arm, leaving a deep cut that immediately began to bleed. The pain was immediate, sharp, and searing, but Reyes did not falter. She gritted her teeth, pushing through the agony as she took a defensive stance, ready for the next blow. The Serath warrior pressed forward, his attacks growing fiercer, each one more punishing than the last. Reyes's body screamed for mercy, every fiber of her being begging her to give in. But with each strike, each moment of pain, she grew more determined. She would not fall. Not now. Not for them. The queen watched intently, her gaze never leaving the human who stood before her. To the Serath, the trial was everything. It was the ultimate measure of strength. But as she watched Reyes endure, something began to shift inside her. The human was not breaking. In fact, she was thriving in the face of pain, as if it only fueled her resolve. The challenge had begun as an exercise in humiliation, but with each passing moment, it was becoming something more. The Serath were beginning to see it, the unrelenting fire that burned in the heart of humanity. Reyes had crossed the point of no return. She wasn't just fighting for her survival. She was fighting for her people's place in the galaxy. And as the trial dragged on, the Queen's thoughts began to change. She wasn't sure what it was, the stubbornness, the resilience, or something else entirely. But she was starting to wonder if perhaps humanity wasn't as weak as she had once thought. For the first time, the Queen began to question everything she knew about the humans. And that, more than anything, was what would change everything. The air in the grand hall was thick with the sound of labored breathing, the clash of steel against skin, and the roar of the Seract warriors as they watched the trial unfold. Queen Vejay remained seated on her raised throne, her eyes never leaving Captain Reyes. The human woman had endured far longer than anyone had expected, her body battered and bloodied from the relentless attacks of the Seract warrior. Each strike of the serrated blade seemed designed to break her spirit, to shatter her resolve. But the more Reyes was cut and bruised, the more determined she became. Her body screamed in pain, each new wound a reminder of the punishment she was enduring, but her eyes remained steady, focused on the task at hand. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for humanity. The warrior lunged forward again, his massive frame moving with brutal speed. The blade slashed across her side, ripping through her uniform and drawing fresh blood. Reyes gritted her teeth, her muscles trembling with the effort of holding herself upright. The pain was almost unbearable now. It was a struggle to keep her legs from buckling, to maintain her stance, but she refused to fall. She refused to show weakness. The audience watched in silence, the tension so thick it felt as though the entire galaxy was holding its breath. No human had ever lasted this long in a Seract trial. Most were broken within minutes, and those who survived even a few strikes were considered legends. But Reyes wasn't just surviving. She was enduring, and that was something the Seract hadn't anticipated. Queen Vejay studied the human with growing fascination. Her heart, if such a thing could be said to exist beneath her cold, reptilian exterior, stirred as she saw the unyielding resolve in the human's eyes. She had expected Reyes to crumble, to beg for mercy or plead for release, but the woman stood tall, bloody but unbowed. The Queen could feel the change in the air, an unspoken shift in the power dynamic between them. The warrior raised his blade again, preparing for another strike. But this time, something in Reyes snapped. She moved before he could strike, her body moving with surprising speed despite the pain. She caught his wrist, twisting it violently, and with a forceful push, sent him staggering back. The move was unexpected, a brief moment of raw, human ingenuity, and it stunned the onlookers into silence. Reyes stood, panting, her body a canvas of cuts and bruises, but her gaze was unwavering. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this trial, this test of strength, was no different. She had nothing left to lose, but the fire within her burned brighter than ever. The Queen's eyes narrowed. The warrior had been humiliated, something no Seract warrior would tolerate. He recovered quickly, roaring in rage as he advanced again, but there was something different now. He hesitated, his movements slightly slower, uncertain. It wasn't fear, but a kind of wariness, as if he wasn't sure how to deal with a human who would not break. Reyes wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for something far greater. She was fighting to prove that humanity wasn't a species to be overlooked or underestimated. She wasn't here to beg for mercy or negotiate for a deal. She was here to show the Seract and the galaxy that humans would stand, no matter the cost. The trial dragged on, each moment an agonizing test of endurance. The pain was now a distant hum in the back of her mind. Her focus was on one thing: survival. And with each passing second, she could feel the respect of the room shifting, slowly but surely toward her. Reyes's body was on the brink of collapse, her blood staining the floor, but there was something else. Something the Seract didn't understand. Pain, for her, was temporary. Pride, however, was forever. The trial had become a spectacle, A brutal dance of endurance and defiance. Captain Rice, bloodied and exhausted, had surpassed every expectation. The Siract warrior, once confident in his superiority, now hesitated with each swing of his blade. Rice had already endured hours of unrelenting assault, and yet she still stood, gasping for breath but unyielding. Her body was covered in deep cuts, bruises, and gashes, but her spirit remained unbroken. The audience, the elite of the Siract Empire, watched in stunned silence. The warriors who had long prided themselves on their might now found themselves unsure. How was this human still standing? What was driving her to continue? In the arena, pain was supposed to be a tool of domination, a way to force submission. But here, with every strike, the human was proving that pain only fueled her resolve. Queen Veja's gaze never wavered. Her icy, reptilian eyes were fixed on the human, and something inside her began to shift. The Siract had always been the strongest, the fiercest, and yet here was a creature, small and fragile by their standards, who was showing them something they had never witnessed before: unwavering defiance. The Siract warrior lunged forward again, his attack wild and uncoordinated. His rage had clouded his focus, and his blade missed its mark by mere inches. Rias, who had been swaying on her feet, suddenly sprang into action. She moved with a speed and agility that surprised even her. Grabbing the warrior's arm, she twisted it behind his back, pushing him to the ground with an unceremonious crash. The move was quick and efficient, a brief moment of raw, human ingenuity that stunned the entire court. The warrior groaned as he struggled to get up, his eyes filled with fury and disbelief. For a moment, it looked as though he might launch another attack, but then something changed in his expression. A flicker of uncertainty, a brief hesitation. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was unsure. He had expected the human to fall to her knees, begging for mercy. He had expected her to break. But she hadn't, and now he wasn't sure what to do next. Queen Veja's lips parted slightly, as if she were about to speak, but she stopped herself. Her gaze flicked from Rice to the warrior, who was slowly getting back to his feet. There was no denying it now. The trial had taken a turn. The Siract had always prided themselves on being the ultimate measure of strength, but in this moment they were witnessing something they had never anticipated. Rice wasn't just surviving, she was winning. The queen's fingers tightened on the armrest of her throne, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. There was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. The power dynamic was no longer as clear as it had been. The Siract, who had once thought of themselves as the inevitable victors in any confrontation, were now faced with an uncomfortable truth. Even legends blink first. The queen had seen countless warriors fall to their knees before her, their strength failing them in the face of her power. But the human was something different, something new. Rice's eyes locked with the queen's, and for a split second, there was no hatred, no anger, just an understanding. They were both warriors in their own right. And in that moment, Veja saw something in the human that she had not expected: respect. Rice was not just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for something far greater than herself, the very dignity of humanity. And in the presence of the queen, in the presence of the Siract, Rice had proven something far more important than strength. She had proven that humanity would never be underestimated again. The silence in the hall was deafening. The Siract warriors, once poised for victory, now stood motionless, their eyes locked on Captain Rice. Her blood had stained the floor, her uniform torn and shredded, but she stood defiant, still facing the warrior who had tried and failed to break her. The air was thick with uncertainty. The queen, who had commanded the room with unchallenged authority only hours before, now watched with a quiet intensity that made even the bravest warriors uneasy. Rice's chest rose and fell with labored breaths, her body trembling from the sheer weight of the trial. Her muscles screamed in protest, her vision blurred from blood loss, but she did not falter. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting to prove humanity's place in the galaxy. The weight of her actions pressed on her shoulders, but she refused to buckle. This moment would change everything. The Siract warrior who had been attacking her stood a few paces away now, his massive chest heaving as he recovered from the unexpected move Reyes had made. The fire in his eyes was no longer just rage. It was uncertainty, something the Siract had never had to face. Uncertainty in the face of a human. The queen leaned forward, her wings unfurling slightly in a silent display of curiosity. Her gaze remained fixed on Reyes, her cold eyes studying the human with a mixture of respect and something else, something much harder to name. It wasn't just the strength Reyes had shown, it was the unwavering will to fight against impossible odds. She wasn't a warrior by the Siract's standards, not in the traditional sense. But in this moment, she was proving herself as worthy of respect as any warrior on the battlefield. "You are far more resilient than I gave you credit for." Queen Veja's voice rang out, cool but tinged with something new. "But this is not a war of endurance alone. You cannot win simply by outlasting your opponent." Reyes's eyes narrowed, blood dripping from her face as she stood her ground. She wasn't about to let this queen think she could intimidate her again. "I don't need to win," Reyes replied, her voice hoarse but steady. "I only need to prove that we, as humans, are not to be overlooked, not to be underestimated." A low murmur rippled through the court, and even the warriors seemed to take a step back. They hadn't expected this. They had thought this trial would be a simple lesson in dominance, that it would end with the human broken at their feet, pleading for mercy. But Reyes had turned the trial into something else. Challenge to their very belief in their own superiority. The queen's expression softened just for a moment, though it was almost imperceptible. She had underestimated the human, just as she had underestimated all of humanity. But in the span of this trial, she had seen something in them that no one, not even the Siract, could ignore: a relentless, indomitable will. "You have made your point, Captain," Veja said, her voice almost a whisper. "You have shown me the strength of your species. I will not deny it." Reyes's breath caught in her chest, unsure of where this conversation was going. The queen had just acknowledged something she had never expected, a kind of respect. She had faced a challenge, and she had survived. No, more than survived. She had thrived. "But you have also shown me your weakness," the queen added, her gaze hardening once again. "And that is something I will not forgive." The words hit Reyes like a slap, the tension in the room rising once again. But the queen was not finished. She rose from her throne, her wings arching high behind her as she addressed the court. "You will be given one final choice, human," Veja said, her voice commanding once again. "You have endured this trial, but I will give you the chance to leave, to walk away from this and return to your people. Or you can continue. Face a final test. And if you survive, the Siract will recognize your species as worthy allies." Reyes's heart raced. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. She wasn't just fighting for herself now. She was fighting for all of humanity. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "I don't need to walk away. I need to prove that we belong here." The queen regarded her for a long moment, her eyes searching, as if considering the human for the first time. Finally, she nodded. "Then prove it," the queen said coldly. "But be warned, Captain. The next test will be your final one." Reyes knew it wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time, she felt the tide turning in her favor. The air in the hall grew heavy with anticipation. Queen Veja's declaration hung like a sword over Captain Reyes's head, and the silence that followed felt like an eternity. The Siract warriors, who had been certain of their victory, now stood in stunned silence, their gaze fixed on the human who had defied their queen's judgment and survived their brutal trial. They had expected an easy show of power, but Reyes had given them something entirely different, a demonstration of unyielding resolve. Reyes's heart pounded in her chest, blood still dripping from her numerous wounds, her body trembling from exhaustion. But as the queen spoke, A new fire kindled within her. She had come here with a single goal in mind: to prove humanity's worth. She had already survived the impossible, but this next test, whatever it might be, would be the ultimate challenge. "You have earned my respect, human," Vasia said, her voice cold yet laced with an unmistakable note of admiration. "But do not mistake this for mercy. The next test will push you beyond your limits. Fail, and you will pay the price. Succeed, and I will consider your species worthy of something greater." Raiz met the Queen's gaze, her breath ragged but steady. She was no stranger to pain, no stranger to hardship. This was nothing she hadn't faced before. She had survived countless battles, fought in wars she had never asked for, and now she was standing on the precipice of something even greater. She wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not ever. "I'll take whatever you throw at me," Raiz replied, her voice unwavering. "I won't fail." Queen Vasia's eyes flickered with something akin to amusement, though it was quickly masked by her regal composure. She waved her hand, signaling to the warriors gathered around the perimeter of the hall. Without a word, they moved, opening a hidden doorway on the far side of the room. The ground trembled as something massive was brought into the arena, obscured by the shadows of the entrance. Raiz squinted, trying to make sense of the movement, but her battered body could barely keep her upright. Then, emerging from the shadows, came the creature that would become her next challenge. A massive, hulking beast with glowing red eyes and a thick, spiked exoskeleton. Its claws scraped against the stone floor as it approached, each step sending vibrations through the air. It was a creature unlike anything Raiz had ever seen. Its size, its sheer power, its unrelenting hunger for blood. The creature let out a deafening roar that shook the walls of the hall, its fangs bared in a snarl. The Siract warriors, who had been unshakable just moments before, now took several steps back. It was a creature born for war, an apex predator in every sense of the word. And it was released into the arena with one purpose: to hunt and kill. Raiz's blood ran cold, but she stood her ground, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the beast. There was no turning back. She had already proven herself once. She wasn't about to let this trial be the end of her, not when humanity's future was at stake. The Queen's voice rang out once more, cold and commanding. "The beast is yours to face, Captain. Defeat it, and you will have earned your place among the stars. Fail, and you will die. It is as simple as that." The creature advanced, its massive jaws snapping in anticipation. Raiz gritted her teeth, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. She had no weapons, no armor, only her wits and willpower. But those, she knew, were enough. "Come on," then Raiz muttered to herself, the fire in her eyes burning brighter than ever before. "Let's finish this." With that, she charged at the beast, the final trial beginning in the most brutal way possible. The beast lunged at Captain Raiz with terrifying speed, its claws slashing through the air like a storm of blades. The sheer force of the creature's attack shook the ground beneath her feet, but Raiz was ready. She dodged just in time, rolling to the side and barely avoiding the lethal claws that would have torn her apart. Her bloodied body screamed with every movement, but she pushed through, refusing to let the pain take control. The creature snarled, its eyes burning with a savage hunger. It was a relentless force of nature, a monster bred for battle, and it had only one purpose: to kill. But Raiz had no intention of becoming its prey. She needed to survive. For herself, for humanity, and for the respect she had already earned from the Queen and her warriors. Raiz staggered to her feet, sweat and blood dripping from her brow. The creature roared, a deafening, bone-chilling sound, and charged again. It was faster than she expected, its claws aiming for her throat. She sidestepped at the last possible moment, narrowly escaping its grasp. The pain in her body was overwhelming, but she had no choice but to keep moving, keep fighting. She had no weapons, no armor, only the skills she had honed in battle over years of service. Her mind raced as she looked for any advantage, any weakness in the beast's attack. Its movements were predictable, based on pure instinct. But instincts alone wouldn't defeat her. She needed to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless. With a swift motion, Reyes grabbed a jagged rock from the ground and hurled it at the creature's face, temporarily blinding it with a well-aimed strike. The beast howled in pain, its massive head thrashing violently. For a moment, it was disoriented, giving Reyes the opening she needed. She charged, using every ounce of strength left in her battered body, and launched herself at the creature's back, wrapping her arms around its thick neck. The beast bucked and twisted, trying to shake her off, but Reyes held on with a vice-like grip. She drove her knees into its spine, forcing it to the ground. Her heart was racing, her mind focused on one thing: survival. She wasn't going to die here. Not like this. Not when she had come so far. The creature growled, its claws swiping at her, but she used her momentum to twist its head sideways, exposing the soft spot beneath its armored hide. With a primal scream, Reyes drove the rock into the gap, using all her remaining strength to drive it deeper. The beast howled in agony, thrashing beneath her, but it was too late. The creature's body went limp, its life force draining away as it collapsed to the ground. Reyes pulled herself free, her body trembling with exhaustion, blood dripping from her wounds. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, but she had done it. She had survived. The creature was dead, and she was still standing. The entire hall was silent. The Seract warriors, the queen, and the spectators all stared in stunned silence as Reyes, battered and broken, stood victorious over the beast. There was no cheering, no celebration. The moment was too profound, too significant for anything as trivial as applause. Queen Vejay slowly stood from her throne, her cold eyes never leaving Reyes. The respect that had been growing in her gaze was now undeniable. She had seen the human endure, fight, and win. Reyes had proven herself in the most brutal way possible. "You have earned your place, human," the queen said, her voice heavy with respect. "You fought not for yourself, but for your people. You showed the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated." Reyes, still struggling to catch her breath, lifted her head, meeting the queen's gaze. "We're not just survivors," she replied, her voice raw but strong. "We're fighters, and we'll always fight, no matter the odds." The queen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something almost like a smile playing at the corners of her lips. She inclined her head in a slow, deliberate gesture. "You are worthy, Captain Reyes, and so are your people." In that moment, everything changed. Reyes had done more than survive the trial. She had earned the Seract's respect, and with it, a place at the table of the galaxy's most powerful forces. Humanity had proven that they were no longer just another species to be ignored. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the universe would never be the same again.